I'm going to do a bad job on this video, I just know it. For the past few weeks I've been listening to all these albums. Oh, here we go. All by an artist called Leonard Cohen. And the idea is I was to refamiliarize myself with all of those albums that I've acquired over the years, and then decide if there's a flood or a fire and I have to run into this room in a hurry and pick one album from Leonard Cohen to take with me to save, which one is it going to be? So I've been listening to all these albums and I'm sick of Leonard Cohen. So I thought today when I want to talk about this, one of the things that emerged through all this listening was that it wasn't clear what is the best album. You go to artists like Yes or Pink Floyd or maybe Bruce Springsteen, Van Morrison. It becomes kind of obvious which albums are the contenders to be the best album of their career, but it's not really the case with Leonard Cohen, I don't think. So I've had to kind of work my way through. And so what I did this morning, I thought, well, if I'm going to do this video today, I'm going to sit there, I'm going to sit at the computer and say, well, look, what am I going to say about these albums and what am I going to say about Leonard Cohen? And so basically I've just brain dumped onto the computer and I've printed off some notes. So if you watch this channel, you watch me on this channel, you'll know that almost all of the time there are no edits and there are no scripts. But this has been tricky, so I am going to use notes and I'm going to read from my notes and embellish them as required. So please be patient. It's not the slickest production, but it is what it is. So right, so let me just get started. So how do you tackle an artist like Leonard Cohen, whose fans are so devoted they won't have a bad word said about their favourite musical sage? I'm a bit nervous about doing Leonard Cohen because he's one of those artists that for most people he's a peripheral interest in their musical palette, but for some people he's like some disciple. Disciple's not the word, no. It's like he's bringing the word of God down to the listener. So anyway, so I don't particularly want to upset anybody, but there's a comment section where people can correct me and say whatever they like. I don't care really, other than please express an opinion. But anyway, for some people, they've grown up with Cohen at their side. Maybe Canadians, I don't know. But he dispensing wisdom, existential musings, the occasional bawdy observation, and not a little humour along the way. There's a bit of his writing that was kind of irreverent and humorous, as I say. Perhaps it's no accident that he, as initially a writer, appeals to the literary set, who, to be fair, are used to committing time and attention to the often difficult task of appreciating high literature and, dare I say it, poetry. There's a sunk cost involved there. If you've sat down with a book for a week or two or three or a month or whatever, then having someone criticise that book after you've worked your way through it and hopefully have been thrilled with the outcome, having people criticise that doesn't always go down well. So people determinedly justify their investment in the reading in the face of criticism or suggested notions of an opportunity cost of being so dedicated. They could have been doing something else. That's the opportunity cost. So people will defend their positions. So I am going to get into Leonard Cohen, just me. But I'm no literature student, and although I enjoy more than my fair share of literary classics, that's not what I look for in my music. I've always been suspicious of record reviewers who seem to focus on the lyrical content of music and who mutter barely a word about the arrangement, the dynamics, the melodic inventiveness, or whatever. Instead, we get amateur psychological assessments of what the songwriter was feeling, his or her backstory, and what message was being attempted to be communicated. This most often involving songwriters who have little to say or nor wisdom to impart. Cohen's different. He's better than that. Yes, someone like me can, with a little study or concentration, can begin to see the poetical competence of songwriters like Van Morrison, Lou Reed, Joni Mitchell, Bob Dylan, and yes, Leonard Cohen. But I mostly consume poetry rarely, and classic literature often in its original form. With music, I'm usually on the hunt for music that moves me viscerally, that stimulates like a nerve reaction from the chord structures, the tension and release, and often wide dynamic swings. It's kind of, why I started off in prog music. Those wild dynamic swings were compelling. This, at its best, the right combination it creates the right combination of vibrations that creates shivers down the back of the neck, hairs on my forearm standing on end, and sometimes even tears in my eyes. So that's music to me. It's not necessarily about the lyrical content. And this is why few singer-songwriters have been able to reach the parts of me that instrumental music has been able to. And that's like why I'm interested in classical music, but also instrumental music of all types, really. I can admire the voice, the poetic content, the more bare arrangements, but few connect with me on an emotional level. There are some exceptions, but there are few. They are to be admired rather than loved. Van Morrison marries poetry with beautiful melodies and a meditative calmness in his music. So, not all this kind of R&B stuff he does, but I'm thinking particularly of Astral Weeks and the late 70s and 80s albums that he put out right up until Hymns to the Silence. Springsteen writes about the struggling and disadvantaged, but with energy and a dynamism that often has an epic feel. Lou Reed writes about city life, edgy morals, people struggling just barely to exist, with music that's in turns dissonant and sensitive. It's rarely epic, with mainly simple electric arrangements. In the 1970s, as a young music enthusiast, I was an avid reader of New Musical Express, The NME, Melody Maker and Sounds, the three main weeklies in the UK. These newspapers guided me to new music. They were able to affirm the choices I'd already made to mitigate buyer remorse. When you buy an album, you think, I'm not sure if I like that one. But reading about how good it is makes you persist with it a little bit. And so it encouraged me to persist with music that I hadn't yet got into. So among the many artists that commanded column inches in the 70s was Leonard Cohen. An important artist, no less. One who made the listener think, was able to intellectualize in interviews with music journalists, like someone maybe more clever than the journalist, and superior, so superior. But no doubt for the journalist, it was more interesting to interview a songwriter who was also a writer, was international, had a way with beautiful women, and than it was to spend time with a bunch of dullard prog rockers from the north of England. I learned from those newspaper columns that Cohen was born to solidly middle-class parents, was a writer of poetry, became part of that scene in Montreal, Canada. He pursued his writing over making money, no doubt because he didn't have any money worries. Middle-class family, he was young, probably being financed by the bank of mum and dad. He was able to seduce attractive women, and he also had he secured a house on a Greek island called Hydra, I don't know, and he spent extended periods there. He turned to music eventually, I understand, to gain an audience and generate his own independent income. He didn't love it much, overcame stage fright, and began to enjoy touring in Europe in particular. It wasn't that popular in America, although I think the French-Canadian audience in particular took to him very, very, fully. So I think a lot of his albums sold more or better in the UK and Europe, mainland Europe. Anyway, all this reading and all that, I was left with the impression that Cohen was, as an intellectual with a voracious libido, an itinerant lifestyle, 6 months here, 3 months there, doing his work or his writing or whatever, but also that he was a bit of a selfish bugger in his relationship, so he kind of did what he wanted to do. I think he broke a few hearts along the way, but you know, someone will correct me on that. Towards the end of the 70s, my curiosity got the better of me, and I finally bought this album, Leonard Cohen's Greatest Hits, the entry point for many late adopters, and I was a late adopter, obviously, mainly through age probably. So what else have I got? Well, Greatest Hits is just that. It is a remarkable collection of songs. You know, Suzanne, Sisters of Mercy, So Long, Marianne, Lady Midnight, The Partisan, Bird on the Wire, Famous Blue Raincoat, Chelsea Hotel No. 2, Who by Fire. It's great album. These have almost become standards, being covered by a multitude of credible artists bowing reverentially before his genius. I was also struck by how sparse the arrangements were, kind of austere, and that didn't really move me. It's not what I go to music for. Maybe it was my age, but the songs didn't speak to me at all. But regardless, I persisted and have over the years bought up his catalogue and my desire to uncover his genius for myself. I feel really weird reading notes here, but hey ho. I'll get through the video quick if I do it that way, so forgive me. As much as I've learned to love his work, his songs have never taken my breath away, you know, given those shivers down the spine. Rather, I've admired his commitment to his art, and with a few faltering starts and setbacks in his career, he's managed to produce admirable work up to and beyond his death in 2016. November 2016, no less. The 70s albums, actually it's not 70s, it's 67, this one, songs Leonard Cohen. So we got Suzanne on here, we've got Sisters of Mercy, So Long Marianne, Hey That's No Way to Say Goodbye. That's all songs that made it to his greatest hits. Songs from a Room, his second album, with a very famous photograph on the back. This one's got Bird on the Wire, The Partisan, Lady Midnight. Another album, Songs of Love and Hate. New Skin, For the Old Ceremony. What do we got here? Chelsea Hotel, Lover, Lover, Lover. There Is a War. Yeah, the good albums. So anyway, what else? So So the 70s albums I've come to view. All these albums I've talked about here are collection. I've come to view as collections of songs without an overarching theme or a concept. Merely the work of a songwriter returning to the studio occasionally and releasing albums that serious music lovers hoovered up, perhaps thinking of themselves as intellectually superior to the buyers of Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple albums. Apart from the Phil Spector Death of a Ladies Man abomination, and it is, I listened to this as well, I got through side one, I just think this is bloody awful. I read something some time ago that the Cohen was in the studio with Spector and there was like loaded pistols sitting on the mixing desk and all that sort of stuff, and all the stuff we've heard about Phil Spector over the years about being a kind of a very unreliable character to have around you with a gun. Yeah, that seemed to be part of the making this album. This sounds like, it doesn't sound like a Leonard Cohen album. Anyway, it's bloody awful. Those late 60s, early 70s albums, to me, are just okay. His voice has a higher pitch than later, and a yearning quality that just isn't that remarkable. And sure, there's a spoken element in his singing style that kind of singled him out a little bit, but it's no surprise that other artists like, I think it's Judy Collins and definitely Jennifer Warnes, brought these songs to life. So one of the things that happened to him I think in the 90s, and I'll talk a little bit about that, is he kind of went off to the mountain to do his meditation and his hard physical work, and the gap was filled by these compilations, tribute albums that other artists were recording versions of his songs, and that had gone on since the late 60s all the way through the 70s as well. But some of these songs and some of these versions were absolutely brilliant and far more musical than is apparent in these early 1970s, late 60s, early 70s albums. However, having said all of the above, sometimes the austere Leonard Cohen is what I choose to listen to, and the quality of the songs is undeniable. On close listening, if you bring attention to it, there's a lot more going on in the songs than just him and an acoustic guitar. The instrumentation is there. As an overall musical experience, though, for me it's been lacking. So my job here, that's a late 70s one, 79, recent songs, gets a play once every few years really. But my job here is to choose one album only, the one that I'll race into this room to save in a fire or a flood. Have to be a major flood. Let's hope none of that happens. And I'm going to choose one album that offers more than relationship angst or declarations of love or the occasional political commentary and so on. I kind of want more. I want a more rounded musical experience. So that's going to inform my choice of album. The Greatest Hits album, fine summary of this period, and is a gateway into each of his early albums. But to me, things got interesting in 1984 with this album, Various Positions. Now, I seem to remember that either me or two or three of us clubbed together and bought this as a birthday present for my mate Andy. And I didn't get this album until some time later, but this is a great album. I think what he'd been doing in recent songs and in this one, he'd been playing around with kind of cheap keyboards like Casio, the cheapest keyboards. There's plinking plonking around his songs, not just little background, but to be the main accompaniment to his vocals. So it was not so much the acoustic guitar as much as now we're starting to hear these cheap keyboards coming in. He'd been increasingly doing that. So so these keyboards were the cheap ones. No great orchestral sounding flourishes embellishing his songs. It was more like some cheap Casio keyboard plinking away, not only in the background, but being the dominant instrument alongside the vocal, that's what I said. While everyone else in the music industry was going mad for a big expansive sound, Cohen was keeping it simple. But the sound was fuller on this album, making it more interesting for me. And so, Various Positions, what have we got here? Well, it starts with a brilliant Dance Me to the End of Love. It includes If It Be Your Will and the unheralded for years to come, Hallelujah. And a great example where his version is nowhere near the best. Anyway, soon afterwards, Jennifer Warnes, who had actually made Famous Blue Raincoat by then, that's her tribute album to Leonard's songs, she released a version of First We Take Manhattan, which ended up on this album, or it was recorded for this album, but this album came out a little bit later, I'm Your Man. And this was 88? 88, so sort of get some significant gap between his albums here. This one sounded more full again, so more varied musical, instrumentation going on. And some more upbeat songs. So that kind of Laughing Lenny tag that he was given in the 1970s for being a miserabilist, unfairly, I think. It kind of fell by the wayside here because this is kind of upbeat in places. So we've got here classics like Everybody Knows, Ain't No Cure for Love, Tower of Song, and I think it's a very good album, and it's a candidate for the album that I will save in the fire. Then we had 4 years, was it 4 years later? Yeah, 4 years later, we had this one. The Future, this is a reissue. More of the same. Waiting for a Miracle, Democracy, Superb, Closing Time, and Anthem would all go down as career highlights. Good album. Good album. Not as good as I'm Your Man, I don't think. And then, if I remember it correctly, he disappeared. he threw himself into a monastic existence up on the mountain, meditating, or doing hard physical work under the guidance of a guru. I think in California this took place. Did he go back and forth to India? But I think he may well have done. But he spent, I think, back and forth for most of the next decade doing this, spending his day doing what I've suggested, work and meditation. And I think the attitude generally was at the time in the music press that he's no longer active. He's the guy who did a couple of 80s albums that had some catchy tunes on it, like, you know, First We Take Manhattan and Everybody Knows. But actually he's still renowned for the guy who wrote and sang Bird on the Wire and such like. But in 2001, if you were a follower of Cohen, you might have expected this, but I wasn't really. And this came out of the blue, and it was 10 new songs. And on the front there is Sharon Robinson, who I think co-produced the album. No, she produced the album for him. This had an altogether different sound. It's got a kind of deep programmed bass, kind of a languid keyboards, slow to medium pace songs, and the lyrical content was kind of reflecting his age as well. And there's a beautiful song in here called Alexandra Leaving on side 2, which is a description of the character Alexandra on her deathbed. It's truly beautiful. It's really good. But his voice had also markedly deepened to such an extent that he was no longer sounding yearning, but a calm wisdom was beginning to kind of emerge in that vocal, in that style. And to me, it was almost like he sounded like a different artist. The album has a consistency about it, which some find it a bit dull. But it's kind of, that consistency is lacking in some of the other albums. So yeah, that's a candidate also for the album that I would save. Sharon Robinson, who I mentioned, was also key to the sound of 10 new songs, but also she was heavily involved in Dear Heather. Now this album I've dipped into not very much. To me it's patchier than 10 new songs, so it's but it's there, it's in the collection. A couple of things that are also worth showing here, live in Fredericton. So we've got Dance Me to the End of Love, In My Secret Life from 10 new songs, Bird on the Wire, Who by Fire. That's a nice EP. And I think around this time he found out that his manager had been embezzling his funds, emptied his bank account, and this, I think there was all sorts of litigation. I'm not sure if he got the money back, but it forced him back on the road to try and recoup his losses. His album, Live in London, this is terrific. Despite him giving his props to his fellow musicians far too often in the show. Ladies and gentlemen, Sharon Robinson. You know what I mean? It's a triple album, really, really good. Very, very well recorded. There's one, I think, live in Dublin as well that followed this. That's less well recorded, not as good as this one. Just got that one on CD. So we're coming towards the end here. Albums were now coming pretty thick and fast. Old Ideas, 2012. Popular Problems, 2014. Both good albums, but I think struggled to overcome his reputation of his best songs coming from the late 60s and early 70s. It was like an albatross around his neck. You know, he was always going to be the guy who did Bird on the Wire and Suzanne, and I guess the critics just were too lazy, and you know, it's the groupthink. They didn't give sufficient attention to his later material. Anyway, he died in 2016. There have been 2 posthumous albums curated and produced by his son Adam, where Leonard's recorded vocals, it's fantastic that he did this by the way, have been supported by delicate and sympathetic instrumentation. Those vocal recordings on You Want It Darker and Thanks for the Dance. Interestingly, I bought this one on album just last week, and it's got a slight mark on side 2. I'm not sure if it's an audible, but I bought a few albums and the guy in the shop let me have this for £10, so I'm well chuffed with that one. I'll clean it up, and I'm hoping that sound is not audible. That little scratch is not audible. Anyway, but his voice on these albums, so deep and resonant. You feel like there's a lifetime of experience, reflection and wisdom that comes right out in a voice like no other popular music artist, not one I can think of. Sure, it's mainly spoken word, but it's sympathetic, it's deep, it's, like I said, it has this kind of wisdom. You feel like you listen to someone who's got something really, really important to say. And those albums are beautiful the way they've been done. Fantastic. So, he started out as a writer who sang songs for money with a young voice full of yearning, but ended up as a Moses. This is what I've written here, forgive me here. He ended up as a Moses-type figure with songs written on tablets of stone and a voice that had a gravitas and strength absent in his earlier recordings. So I kind of veer towards the later Leonard Cohen. So which album would I save? One, if there was a fire or a flood, and two, which album would I recommend to others? Well, firstly, the second question first. Few of his albums hang together as coherent pieces of work with a mood that is sustained. If you want the best songs, then pick a best-of package like this one. Hallelujah and songs from his albums. This is absolutely superb. This is 4 sides. What have we got here? We got a Glastonbury live performance of Hallelujah, Suzanne, Bird on the Wire, Famous Blue Raincoat, Chelsea Hotel, Who by Fire Dance Me to the End of Love, I'm Your Man, Anthem, The Future, In My Secret Life, Show Me the Place, You Got Me Singing, You Want It Darker, and Thanks for the Dance from those 2 posthumous albums. However, for a single album, finally getting to the end now, and me committing to a non-best of, then it's this one that I am going to pick as the album that I'm always going to go back to. And I probably play this 100 times, and that is 10 New Songs. I just think there's a consistent mood here. There's empathy in the lyrics. The melodies are very memorable. Sharon Robinson's vocal and instrumental contributions work brilliantly for me. And so for me, this is kind of the sweet spot in their career. His voice is not quite as deep as it becomes, but it's deeper and much more resonant than it was in those earlier albums. So that's me and the end of Leonard Cohen for a while, and the end of this video. So I've been wanting to do this for weeks, and sorry I had to do it with my notes, but there you go. Hopefully that makes sense. So if you're interested in Leonard Cohen, you know, and you're not that sure, go for this one. Or if you want one of his albums and you're not seduced by the critics telling you should always buy the first album, then this one's the one to go for me. Anyway, catch you on the next video. Bye for now.